Well, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Russia Disruption. My name is Sandy Campbell. I'm the Executive Director of the Santa Fe Council on International Relations. Today, of course, is a collaborative talk with the Phoenix Committee on Foreign Relations and the Malikian Center for Russian, Eurasian, and East European Studies at Arizona State University. Welcome, everybody, from the Phoenix area and from across Arizona as well. Let me also welcome today legacy members of the Lanel Foundation to today's talk. We're thrilled to have you here and hope you enjoy every minute. We, of course, do all kinds of work at the Los Alamos High School, where we have some outstanding high school fellows, and every year stage our innovative policy simulation there, the Next Gen Sim, which always focuses on a global energy issue. Of course, in a normal year, which this definitely is not a normal year, but in a normal year, we host all kinds of young global leaders through our partnership with the State Department. We have a robust student education program. We do all kinds of in-person events. And we have our annual Journalism Under Fire conference that happens every autumn, all kinds of great things in a normal year. This, of course, being this pandemic year, we're doing things differently. So we have a live stream every Thursday at 10 a.m. Where we get to explore all kinds of the amazing issues shaping today's world. Tomorrow, we're going to look at local journalism and how that affects democracy. And one of our speakers, of course, was deported from Myanmar in 2009 for training local journalists. And she has a lot to say about the situation for journalists in Myanmar there today. And next Thursday, March 4th, we're going to feature the editor-in-chief of Bloomberg News, John Micklethwait, alongside Adrian Wooldridge of The Economist. They'll be discussing their new book, The Wake-Up Call, Why the Pandemic Has Exposed the Weakness of the West and How to Fix It. All details, of course, are on our website, sfcir.org. And if you don't want to ever miss a minute of our amazing talks, drop us a line at admin@sfcir.org, admin@sfcir.org. We'll put you on our mailing list and you'll never miss another minute. Our next Russia Disruption talk, and we have a number sort of planned, but not yet with a date, is on March 18th, where we'll feature the extraordinary Andrei Sigankov, who's a professor at San Francisco State University, and he'll be speaking about Russia and America after Trump. That's Thursday, March 18th at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. And as a little teaser, in this series, we'll also feature, among others, Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch. So join our members of Congress and prepare your questions for the ambassador. We don't have a date for that yet, but one is coming. So please stay tuned, sign up for our mailing list, and you'll get all the details dropped right into your inbox. So that is more than enough from me. Let me bring now in today's speakers. And we have a great set of folks for you here today. So let me start with introducing Yevgenia Albats. Welcome, Yevgenia.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So Yevgenia is a Russian investigative journalist, political scientist, author, and radio host. Since 2007, she's been the political editor and then editor-in-chief and CEO of The New Times, a Moscow-based Russian-language independent political weekly. Currently, she's a senior fellow at the Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies at Harvard University, working on her new book, and we're thrilled to have you join us here today. Next up, let me introduce Sean Walker. Good morning, Sean. Good afternoon, Sean.
Hi, good afternoon.
Sean, of course, is a foreign correspondent for The Guardian, currently based in Budapest. He spent more than a decade reporting from Moscow and was The Guardian's bureau chief there between 2013 and 2018. His book, The Long Hangover, Putin's New Russia and the Ghosts of the Past, was published by Oxford University Press in 2018. And again, we're delighted to have you here with us today, Sean. And last but certainly not least is Paul Colby. Good morning, Paul. How are you?
Morning, how are you?
So Paul, of course, is a veteran CIA officer and executive with 25 years of service in the Directorate of Operations, where he led operations in Russia, Central Asia, and Eastern Europe. Following his CIA career, Paul was director for intelligence at British Petroleum, where he focused on geopolitical threats, strategic cyber threats, and support to commercial operations. And he's currently the director of the intelligence project at Harvard University's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs. So, panelists, welcome. Let me turn to you, Paul. And Paul, can you bring us up to date on the current, litany of issues and disputes that have driven relations with Russia to, potentially post-Cold War lows right now?
Thanks, Sandy. Yeah, I'd be happy to, and it's really a great honor to be here both with Yevgenia and Sean. Look, relations between the U.S. and Russia are perhaps at the lowest point that they've been since the end of the Cold War. And much of that will be attributed to the Trump administration, but the antecedents of that go back much farther. And they're not going to be easily resolved. You're not going to see a sudden reset, sudden respark of relations between Russia and the US under a Biden administration. And we've seen some early signals of that with likely sanctions coming out around one of the issues we'll talk about today with Alexei Navalny, as well as cyber attacks, the SolarWind cyber attacks. But there's also bitter experience of a series of American presidents, going back to Clinton, Bush, Obama, who started off their administrations with high hopes for what American-Russian relations would be, only to be quickly disappointed. And I think the Biden administration is determined not to repeat that mistake. They will start off with a pretty tough approach, and we've already seen signals of that. Look, I think it's helpful to go through the series of issues that are extremely problematic with regards to the United States and Russia, and not just the United States, but also its allies. First and foremost, everyone will obviously focus on the years of reporting on election interference going back to 2016. And a few things that are really important to note about that. First of all, it wasn't just the hacking of the Democratic National Committee, but it was the operationalization of the information that was stolen, i.e. using that information to influence a political process. No doubt about that, no dispute about that. Russians did that. They did it quite effectively. One bright spot is that behavior did not appear to repeat in 2020. We didn't see that same type of operation. And I think there was a conscious decision made in Moscow not to undertake that behavior, which they certainly could have. That said, there were a lot of other behaviors, particularly disinformation campaigns, massive disinformation campaigns that were designed to sow discord among the American population and between allies, that were designed to bolster both extremists on the right and on the left, and that were designed to sow confusion. None of this is new. The Russian security services have been doing this since the start of the Soviet state, and have done so with great success and quite systematically. But what was different here was just how exponentially effective the operations were because of social media, because of the internet, because of the way they masterfully manipulated domestic opinion, pitting groups against each other. So election interference, disinformation activities still continuing, assassinations, which we'll talk about today. Look, the assassination attempt on Navalny is just the latest in a long series of assassinations targeting political dissidents, targeting foreign leaders, targeting journalists, targeting in some cases counterterrorism opponents. But there's been a blurring, and often what are called counterterrorism operations really are politically focused operations. So you've got cases of poisonings of people in London, Litvinenko and Skripal being two both former KGB, former security service officers, each poisoned with a different weapon of mass destruction, one radiological, Litvinenko poisoned with polonium-210, and Skripal poisoned with Novichok, a military-grade chemical weapon. Only the Russian state has access to those weapons. The choice of them is not accidental, both being extremely effective, but also sending a very clear signal. But we've also seen a series of assassinations, some public, some not known, some successful because they didn't appear as suspicious, but against political oppositionists and journalists in Russia, those that the state saw as a potential threat. Well, very wide variety of those. Some of the most prominent of them being Anna Politkovskaya, friend of Yevgenia, Boris Nemtsov, a prominent politician, gunned down literally steps away from the walls of the Kremlin. So that campaign has continued through the years, and it's really reached I won't say a crescendo because that would suggest that it's going to abate. But it's reached such a point of prominence, partly because of some of the investigative work that were done by other journalists, in particular Bellingcat, uncovering the very clear FSB, Russian Internal Security Service, fingerprints on that assassination attempt of Navalny. So adding to assassinations, you have war and frozen conflicts. Georgia, Ukraine, Crimea, Donbass, Moldova, other frozen conflicts, constant pressure on Estonia and the Baltic states. Adding to that, you've got incessant, pervasive cyber operations against the United States. A lot of publicity about solar winds. What makes solar winds quite remarkable was the scale of it. So for those who aren't familiar with solar winds, it was a supply chain cyber hack using solar winds software, which is used by many U.S. government agencies and thousands of private sector companies. So in uploading in a normal update of that software, malware packages designed by the Russians were uploaded into thousands of organizations. Malware was triggered, i.e. Used to steal information from dozens of U.S. agencies and hundreds of U.S. companies. An attack of remarkable scale. The damage is not known because that investigation is still going on and because so many of the tracks were recovered. So adding to cyber issues, you have arms control treaty violations, you have human rights violations, and you have a fundamental clash of values with Russia pitting itself against Western values and purporting to be a defender of traditional values of Christendom. So you've got a remarkable period of distrust, a remarkable period of different points of conflict, different places where they're rubbing together, and almost no contact has taken place over the last years between U.S. and Russian authorities. So it's created an environment that is both dangerous and not likely to improve. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Paul. That's a great overview. Of course, Russia is in the news left and right now surrounding the figure of Alexei Navalny. Yevgenia, you know Alexei. You know what drives him. Can you give us an update on Navalny and where things are headed for him?
Thank you very much. I'm really grateful for inviting me. I have great memories about my travel around Arizona and New Mexico, and I'm thrilled to speak for your audience. First of all, and Paul, thank you very much for your introduction and for setting up the stage. I would just want to say that when you say Russians, it's not exactly correct, because Putin and his clique, they really don't represent the entire Russian people, and we really don't know how many of us he does represent. I'm a citizen of Russian Federation. That's the only passport I have. And I never voted for Mr. Putin. However, since 2000, for the last 20 years, there were never been any competitive elections in the Russian Federation. Therefore, we really don't know what is his ratings. All independent pollsters were kicked out from the Russian political scene. So once again, whatever ratings you see in the media or claimed by Kremlin, they reflect Kremlin views solely. So that's why I always prefer. I'm trying. I would want to say that please don't equalize Kremlin and Russian people. Of course, we are all different, and some of us are more inclined to conservative views. Some of us are more inclined to democratic or liberal views. But there is no way to say that Putin represents us as a country. No, he doesn't. He's the one who, better should be understood as an occupation force which took over the country because it's not just him, it's the power of the corporation, the graduates of the KGB, of its counterintelligence operations first and foremost, who took control over all agencies of the Russian Federation. As of now, graduates of the KGB control all 10 state monopolies. Therefore, they control all energy resources in the country, all communication facilities. They are in full control of cash inflow and outflow in the country. So, these people, they became ostensibly rich precisely because they were and are from the Putin's closest entourage. Those of them who were, just, petty thieves, in St. Petersburg back in 1990s, now they turned into billionaires. So again, it is to say that Russian civil society, whatever weak it is, found itself at the heart of the battle with the most repressive, violent, and conspiratorial institution of the Soviet Union, the KGB. That's what we're against, what we're fighting against. Unfortunately, for quite a while, here in the West, including in the United States, there were quite a few and have been quite a few Putin's enablers who are promoting him as this macho man who is capable to keep in his fist those barbarians in Russia, in this northern country, which never had democracy before. So anyway, that's just, I want to say that Russia, Putin and Russians not the same. Now, talking about Alexei Navalny, for the matter of full disclosure, yes, we're friends. I know him since 2004. He was, in a way, one of my, I had, a group of political kids when I was professor at the Moscow University, and I was teaching political science anyway. So I know him pretty well, but what's important that over the years, Navalny emerged as the leader of the opposition, of the liberal democratic opposition in Russia. And on August 20, 2020, Navalny was poisoned with the military nerve engine from the group of Novichok. It became known, it's not just, we journalists think that, it might be Novichok, but in fact, thanks to the German government, and for those of you who may not know this story very well, Navalny was poisoned in the northern city in Tomsk. The poison was put in his underwear's coat piece. He was on the plane when he collapsed and went into coma. Thanks to the pilot of the Russian private airline S7, the plane was landed 2 hours later in another northern city, Omsk, and then 2 days later, under the request of his family, his wife Yulia, he was lifted by private ambulance to Germany, to the University Clinic Charité in Berlin, and he became a personal guest of the then Angela Merkel, the then Chancellor of Germany. So the German government announced that a laboratory of the German armed forces, designated by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, had identified an organophosphorus nerve agent from the Novichok group in the blood samples, and then blood samples taken from Navalny, and that was also subsequently confirmed by several other labs of Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons in Europe. Navalny was 18 days in coma, 24 days in emergency care. He woke up remembering nothing, was unable to use his arms and feet, and he had to go through intensive rehabilitation process. As a result, however, on December 29th, 2020, Russian agency that's in charge of Russian prisons put him on its wanted list, as if they didn't know where Navalny was, even though, of course, and they have all these documents to prove that charity informed Russian law enforcement agencies that Navalny was undergoing outpatient treatment all the way until January 15, 2021, and that he informed his handlers in Moscow where he was and provided his address, and they sent him a telegram to that address in Berlin, and these telegram found him anyway. So Russian authorities did their best in order to warn Navalny from returning back home. But of course, his job description prescribes him to be in Russia because he's a politician, because, you know, he represents those oppressed people who are fighting for their freedoms. He cannot do it from afar, from Berlin, or, you know, from any other lovely country in Europe. So on January 17th, 2021, Navalny flew from Berlin to Moscow, and he was detained right away, even before he managed to cross the border. He was detained, and last 2 weeks ago, he was his conditional sentence that he got in 2014 on totally Trump-up charges, which were denounced by the European Court of Justice, European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, as the one that based on no law as an unjust sentence. It was revoked and it was transferred into the real sentence. So now he is facing years in the Pelon colony. I corresponded with, I have been corresponding with Navalny. You know, I'm writing to him and he's responding to me. And one of his last letters, you know, it's written, of course, in Russian. He wrote to me, Zhenya, I do believe that I did everything right. That was the right thing to do. And yes, you know, in any case, everything is going to go well and we are going to overcome this. And if not, then at least you and I, we will know that we were honest people. He's an amazingly brave person. And he's a person of devotion and understanding of common good. However, yesterday, all of a sudden, out of the blue skies, Amnesty International, a human rights organization with a very strong grassroots movement outside Europe and the United States and other parts of the world, and all of a sudden announced that I want to cite it exactly how they said it. I'm sorry, you know, I had it here. It announced that it stripped off Navalny of his prisoners of conscience status that Amnesty International awarded him several weeks ago when he was unlawfully imprisoned due to past hate speech. What does it mean? In 2006, 2007, Navalny for a while played with the Russian nationalist movement. You know, if any of you will have questions about them, that I will be happy to talk about that. And I very much supported him in what he did. However, in one of his videos, he used improper wording with respect to people of Georgia. Georgia is not your Georgia, it's our Georgia, or it used to be our Georgia. one of the Soviet republics. Now it's a sovereign state. And in 2008, 2008, Russia was at war with Georgia, and two ethnic regions of Georgia now, basically, successfully Russia cut it off from Georgia. Anyway, Navalny felt that he had to support Russian soldiers who were fighting in the Northern Caucasus, and he used totally improper wording. However, in 2013, answering questions from the side of the newspaper Novaya Gazeta, it's one of those democratic outlets which left in Russia. He was asked precisely about the wording that he used, and he answered, yes, I used improper wording. I regret that. It was wrong. It was bad. And I regret that I did it. However, it turned out that Moscow office of the Amnesty International had no idea about the decision of the Amnesty International head office in the United Kingdom. As it turned out, Russia Today, known as RT, its correspondents were used to send letters to some regional offices of Amnesty International. And for some strange reasons, a local office in Spain submitted a request to the head office, as far as I understand, we're still investigating the situation, to the head office of the United Kingdom, demanding that Navalny should be stripped of his prisoner of conscience status due to past hate speech. To be sure, each and every Russian propaganda channel are talking about this 24/7 since. And of course, all that was done in the week, exactly at the time when Minister for Foreign Affairs of the European Union, it is 27 nation strong body, have been negotiating the sanctions against Kremlin predators. And it's done at the same time when, as we know, State Department and White House are discussing sanctions against Russian officials from the side of the United States, and the fate of the Nord Stream 2 also is up in the air. I can tell you, since I've been, my entire life, I write about the KGB and its offsprings. And I studied at large, the active measures operations that were conducted by the Soviet KGB outposts all across the globe. And, of course, in the United States, but predominantly in what was called back then third world countries. What is happening now with Amnesty International looks to me exactly as that type of active measures. That's, we know that Russia Today is not really a media. It's a state-owned facility which is used to spray conspiracies and lies, especially in the West and in Latin America, Africa, etc. So I probably will put a stop here. I will be absolutely happy to answer your question. I understand that for American public, certain things, especially, since you're an imperial country, it's hard for you to understand, the notion of nationalism existed in Europe, and why in undeveloped, politically undeveloped and structured political countries like Russia, it is absolutely normal thing. Anyway, thank you so much for your time and your attention.
Thank you, Evgenia. And there's a lot of questions that I want to come back to about Navalny and sort of what what awaits him. But let's move to Sean now. And Sean, you worked for a couple of decades in Moscow. Can you walk us inside the Kremlin and give us some perspective from President Putin and why he's responding to Navalny the way he has?
Yeah, I mean, I think the simple answer to that question is that Navalny is very good at doing politics. So I think it's changed, and the balance and the tone has changed at different times. But essentially, over the last 2 decades, when Putin's been in charge, there's been this system which at one time was called managed democracy, where the Kremlin has co-opted some of the softer opposition and said, okay, which can be called the systemic opposition, may be completely fake, or it may be willing to work, not fake, but willing to work within certain bounds that is separate, where you can try to change things, but you can't challenge Putin and you can't challenge certain things. And then there's been the other part of the opposition that has been unwilling to play the roles that were given to it. And with those, the Kremlin has used a mixture of sort of threats and sometimes attacks and dismissing them and discrediting them. So either by playing on Russia's historical legacy and saying all these people want is revolution and now we have stability, why would we want this revolution? Or by saying that they are agents of the West, of the State Department, of the CIA, and so on. And at various times, Putin's ratings have looked better or worse, but essentially within the Russian system, that strategy has tended. I mean, it's worked because it's 2020 and 2021, and Putin's still in charge. And Navalny was always very good at not playing that game. There's been various tactics to deal with Navalny. There was a brief moment where they even decided to let him run for the Moscow mayor election in 2013. And that he gave us a glimpse then of how he's a pretty dangerous politician for the Kremlin. He got 27% of the vote, even though he had no real access to campaigning. And after that, they tried to throw all of the threats in their arsenal at him. His brother spent several years in jail. He was attacked on the street. Anybody associated with him had these Byzantine and terrible court cases launched against them. And for many politicians would quite understandably say, this is too dangerous, this is too unpleasant, I'm going to leave, I'm going to go and live in the West somewhere. He always refused to do that. Instead, each time something like that was thrown at him, he seemed to almost come back stronger. And he found a way to be able to talk to people that I think, there's this stereotype of Russian opposition going back, even to the Tsarist times, of this sort of lack of ability to connect with, so-called common person. And I accompanied Navalny on a couple of trips before the 2018 election to the provinces of Russia. And I remember I went with him on one occasion to Chelyabinsk, which is a grimy industrial town in the Urals, and he was due to speak at an environmental protest. And as often happens in these situations, the Kremlin or the local authorities had sent a bunch of 100 people just to shout so that anything he said couldn't be heard. And it was a sort of real mess. And I think most people would have found this a very impossible situation to deal with. And he sort of laughed at these people and he said, you can keep shouting this, but I've got a microphone and you haven't, so I'm going to talk anyway. And when I leave, you're still going to have to breathe this polluted air, and I'm going to be on the plane to Moscow tonight. So why don't you just shut up and listen? And a weird thing happened. They actually did shut up and listen. And, I'm talking to people when they were leaving. I don't think anybody was turned into a card-carrying Navalny supporter overnight, but a bunch of people said, it's interesting, like nobody from Moscow has ever really come and spoken to us here. And maybe he is an agent of the West, but fair play to him. He's saying very sensible things. And you could just see that he had this ability to turn something in people's minds. And for years, when you've talked about or when many people have talked about that danger, the response, whether it's in a sort of official office in Moscow or whether it's on Twitter, is, oh, he's just this creation of the Western media. He's got a 2% approval rating. He doesn't have any support. On the one hand, partly true. On the other hand, what does a 2% approval rating mean in a country like Russia with a polling culture like Russia? And finally, even if it is true, I mean, I think he has a higher approval rating than 2%, but even if it was 2%, I mean, I think what we saw in Belarus in the beginning of August, just a couple of weeks before the poisoning of Navalny, was how fragile in these authoritarian systems approval ratings are. Putin is, I think, probably more popular and certainly more sophisticated than Lukashenko. But what the Kremlin saw was that in a country very similar to Russia in many ways, and among a population quite similar, this guy who for decades has apparently had these great approval ratings and has no threats, is suddenly at serious risk from, not a Navalny style figure, but someone who until a few months earlier had never even done politics, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, the wife of one of the candidates who'd been jailed. So I think if you ever needed one, that was a wake-up call for people in the Kremlin, that he can be dangerous. And I mean, I guess I'd say that in carrying out this attack, which was eventually unsuccessful, they have managed to do everything that they've wanted to avoid for so long. They've turned Navalny from a Russian opposition figure that people may have vaguely heard of if they follow Russia, but essentially as an internal figure, to somebody of global significance. Merkel comes to him in hospital. Every world leader is tweeting about him. Somebody who really means something. And secondly, they've created this this personalized battle between Putin and Navalny, which they were always trying to say is not there. Look at where is Navalny and where is Putin? He's the president. This guy is just some blogger. We're not even going to say his name. It's ridiculous to think that Putin would be worried about him. Well, now it's pretty clear that Putin was worried about him, is worried about him enough to try to have him killed. And in response, Navalny comes back with this video about Putin's corruption in the palace. So it's really the exact narrative that the Kremlin wanted to say is incorrect. I think has come back much stronger. Obviously now, however, he and a lot of people around him are in prison, maybe for a long time. So it's an open question as to how powerful and how much change he can effect while he's sitting inside a jail cell.
Well, let's pick up on that point. And Paul, I think I'll throw this question to you. Why has the assassination attempts why have they been so clumsy? Why have they used, a substance only available to the Russian state and therefore trackable to the Russian state? If they wanted to do the job, why didn't they do the job? And this builds on a question from Jeffrey Gallup, and Sean just touched on this, the act of assassination, whether successful or not, doesn't muzzle opposition, it provokes the opposition. So what's happening here? And why did Russia determine, or the state of Russia determine, it would use these tactics that ultimately have kind of spectacularly backfired?
I might challenge the premise. I'm not sure they've backfired. They haven't always been well executed, no pun intended. But I think they continue to use assassination as a political tool because it's been effective. It's been effective in eliminating threats. It's been effective in sending messages and instilling fear. It's a mechanism of state terror, both for those in the country and without. The fact that Navalny, survived, I think, was a matter of serendipity. Evgenia noted it was the actions of a pilot who unexpectedly landed the plane. It was the action of doctors who administered the first aid and treatment that saved him. It was I don't quite understand how the decision was made to ever let him out of the country to Germany. I think that probably a big mistake was made there. And in Navalny itself, and those who haven't heard this, he called one of the men on his hit team, one of the surveillance who were identified by Bellingcat, called him at his home in what, in any other circumstance could have been thought of as a prank call, but he played the role masterfully of a harried aide to a senior security official demanding information about what went wrong, and got the assassin, or part of the member of the assassination team, to admit, oh, we screwed up. We didn't put enough we didn't put enough Novichok in his underwear. Maybe he didn't wear it long enough. It was absolutely remarkable admission of what was done. And then in the face of that Navalny goes back. In the face of that is really a remarkable act of bravery. I think an epic act of bravery. But they continue to use it because it's been effective. Even if in some cases, because I think there's what we've seen and have been publicized is just the tip of the iceberg. I think most of there are lots of suspicious deaths, lots of things eliminated, or people eliminated. And it's sent messages as well. And I think it really reflects, and just going back to Navalny, to Yevgeny's original points, yeah, she's absolutely right. You can't equate the Kremlin regime and the circle of Siloviki, of security officials that Putin has surrounded himself with Russia or the Russian people. It is a quite narrow ruling clique that is based purely on power. And it's one of the things that Putin did when he first came in, was establish what he called the vertical of power, of establishing KGB, FSB control, security service control of the political levers in Moscow, of the main economic levers in the country. So main industries of energy and transportation and mining and finance. And he established control over all of the state governments, all of the oblasts, where he installed his old people, many of them also former security officials.
Well, perfect. Well, Yevgeny, let me build on that. And this is a question from Los Alamos from 20 Fox. Given what you outlined and what Paul just reiterated about the control of the Russian state over Russia, is there a legitimate path to leadership for Navalny in the near term? Are we at the sunrise moment of Russian opposition right now, or what are the prospects, in your opinion, for this opposition to President Putin to continue to rise?
Thank you very much for this question. Let me tell you the following. According to the latest polling done by the only independent pollster in Russia, which unfortunately has a pretty small sample. For those of us who did stats, we know that the 950 strong sample is not enough for the country of as big as Russia. Still, according to their latest poll, every fifth citizen of the Russian Federation, of those who were questioned, approve what Navalny does. His biggest constituency, it's 19%, Sean, it's 2%, it was a while ago. It's 19%. His biggest approval rating is among young people age 18-24. And his biggest negative rating is among those people who take Russian propaganda TV, and all Russian TV networks are under control of the state, who get the news from the Russian TV channel. That's people in their late 60s. So for one, and also name recognition, Navalny's name recognition reached 75% as of recently. So of course, Navalny is a contestant to Putin, and should we have a free and fair elections in the next couple of months, and Navalny would have access to the statewide TV. For those of you who have hard time imagine Russia. It is a country, it's geographically the biggest country in the world. It stretches over 11 time zones. And unlike here, where you can take Route 66 and drive all the way from the East Coast to the West Coast, in Russia, roads, unfortunately, are not that good, especially in the after Ural Mountains. So half of Russia is Europe, half of Russia is Asia. So you need access via TV in order to, Russian propaganda channels has control over 98% of all households across all Russian time zones. Navalny was very successful in using internet and especially YouTube in order to get his constituency. He has some 6 million subscribers to his YouTube channel. He used to run, before he got poisoned, he had his weekly show on YouTube, which had, amazing ratings. More people watched his YouTube political show on each Thursday, than they watched Russian TV. Finally, his investigation on Putin's palace in the Russian south, worth of, some unbelievable amount of money. Just, none of your rich people can allow for anything like that to exist. It was, it had over 100 million viewers already. So, yes, Navalny has become a real leader of the Russian opposition. And even though a lot of activists now are sitting in jails, and, people who went out on the streets with protest when he was arrested, many of them were severely beaten by the riot police and were sentenced to time in prison facilities, and many of them lost jobs. One of my colleagues immediately got fired from the Moscow-based university, and in fact, all those of liberal views are no longer are capable to work even for private universities, not talking about state-owned universities in Russia. So it's going to be a struggle. I cannot promise you that we're going to win tomorrow, but we will. It's no question asked. We will. Russia is a country of very well-educated people, and it's younger generation who never lived under Soviets and who didn't know, this fear of repressions and this fear of double talk that existed in the Soviet Union. They want to get their freedoms. They want to be citizens of the civilized world. So it will take time for sure, and many of us probably will not live long enough to see that victory. But it's going without saying that Russian Democrats and Russian liberals are going to win this battle. Now, there is one important thing. Please don't help Putin. But that's exactly what's happening in many European capitals, and what was happening in the United States over the last 4 years. It's just unbelievable that, that Carnegie Corporation, the only American organization that has an office left in Moscow, Carnegie.ru, publishes day after day, hires those columnists who smash Navalny, who bash him all around. It is really, I cannot find proper wording to talk about people who receive nice Western, American salaries, living in Russia and knowing that any minute they will be lifted and transferred to the United States, and they conduct these smear campaign against Navalny. And when I asked my colleagues in Moscow Carnegie, whether they have the support approval from the Washington one, from the office in Washington, they said, yeah, because it gives access to Kremlin. Please don't do this. It doesn't give you any access. Trust me, they don't get any information that I, as a journalist, cannot get. It just, but it's just shameful thing to do, I believe, especially in the situation when it became that clear that Putin and his people tried to poison Navalny. In fact, it was the third time they made attempt on his life, the third time. And there is no, it's the investigation done by Bellingcat. For those of you who are not familiar with this investigation, you can go on the Davis Center for Russian Studies of Harvard University website. There is my interview with Krista Groziev, the top investigator with the Bellingcat, who did this investigation. So that's what I would say, that if you in the United States and if people unfortunately, one of great politicians of this country, David Kramer, he wrote in one of his pieces, I don't remember whether it was in Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, or New York Times. He wrote that Putin has been very successful in exporting corruption to the West. And that's exactly true. Because it's not just, the former chancellor of Germany who became Putin's puppet, and who Putin's awarded with $1 million salary in Gazprom. But unfortunately, quite a few people in the European capitals and here in the United States turned out to be willing Putin's executioners or supporters or whatever noun you would like to use in that matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Evgenia. Let's turn to the subject of disinformation. I would encourage all of you to go to the Wikipedia page about disinformation, where you can learn that it was coined by Joseph Stalin in 1923 and is named after a KGB black propaganda unit. So, Sean, let me ask you this question about disinformation and misinformation. And this is a couple of questions from the audience. Are Russians as misled by and susceptible to Kremlin misinformation as Americans have proven to be? And I guess just as a follow-up of that, is there a general segment of the Russian population that really legitimately believes some of the narrative coming out of the state and therefore, support, people like President Putin? Let's talk about disinformation a little bit from where you sit.
So the question is, are Russians as susceptible as Americans to Russian disinformation? Well, so I think there's a lot. I think they probably faced with a larger percent of their diet of information is likely to be Russian disinformation if you're a Russian than if you're an American or a Brit. So, while I think clearly the last few years have shown us that Russian disinformation operations, troll farms, all this kind of thing targeted at the West is a real threat. It's a presence threat, and it's something that people need to be alert to and need to deal with. Without getting too much into this, because I feel like we've all talked about it so much for the last few years, but at times I feel like, as we know, all that Russian disinformation does in the US or the UK is to play with internal issues that are already there. And I think sometimes you can over-focus on the Russian disinformation aspect of it at the sort of expense of the domestic problems aspect of it. Now, obviously, inside Russia, it's a different matter. Evgenia already gave a very good outline of the way that the sort of information ecosystem works in Russia. That for a large number of people, especially older people, they do get news from the state television, and different times the messaging is different, but it's always what the Kremlin wants it to be. It's been quite interesting to see the change with Navalny, which again sort of shows that he has now become this figure that they didn't want him to become. Whereas I think the tactic of state media until very recently was ignore Navalny, do not mention him, do not say his name, do not give him the oxygen of publicity. That's clearly been a little bit harder to pull off now, because they're seeing, I guess, just how many people are engaging with his YouTube videos, are aware of his presence. So there's been a complete turnaround to a case where now they are talking about Navalny, but they're talking about him in these terms of, you know, a Western agent, someone who's sent to destabilize Russia. And I think, as Yevgeny has said, obviously things like the Amnesty International thing will be perfect fodder to sort of feed into that fire. There was a second part of the question, but I can't remember what it was now.
Well, the second part of the question is sort of saying, are there a lot of Russians who legitimately tend towards a lot of the nationalist sentiments or some of the issues that might appear in sort of officially sanctioned state narratives? Or is the Russian populace sort of really eager for you know, the kinds of information that you, Yevgenia, create and that you, Sean, report on? Or I guess give us a snapshot of the Russian populace in terms of the way that they absorb media, and whether and how they themselves work to counter some sort of official, you know, dis or misinformation coming from the state.
So I'll say something quickly, and then I'm sure Yevgenia also has some strong opinions on that. I mean, I think both is true. I think there are plenty of people in Russia who have legitimate sympathy for a lot of, or you know, different groups have sympathy for different parts of Kremlin messaging. And I think there are an enormous number of people in Russia who are thirsty for different sorts of information, and many people who are getting it. It's certainly not. Again, I mean, you know, it's certainly, you certainly can't say that Putin only. That there's nobody who legitimately supports Putin. But then you have a question of, well, can you even talk about legitimate support when you do have such a closed information ecosystem? I mean, I think something that was a big part of Putin's popularity when he first came to power, and I mean, it's kind of absurd that they are still using this trope, but with certain demographics, it still seems to work, which is to reference the kind of pain and poverty that a lot of people felt in the 1990s, and to say, you know, you remember this, Putin came and he brought stability, and you should all be grateful for that. You know, a reasonable message perhaps in 2002, a somewhat ridiculous message in 2021. So I think what having the closed media system has been really good for doing with the population is that it's helped to sort of push this message that we're aware that there are problems. We know that the elites are corrupt. We know that there's difficulties, but Putin's above that and he's trying to sort it out. Even though he's been there for 20 years, but he's still, you know, he hasn't managed it yet, but he is trying to sort it out. And I think what Navalny is so dangerous for them is that he's saying, no, Putin is not trying to sort it out. Putin is the top of this system. And, you know, here is my video showing his palace.
Let me put a question to you, Paul. It's a question that puts you in a chair of great speculation because there are things we simply don't know. We watched for the last 4 years a rather shocking relationship between President Trump and President Putin. What lies at the heart of that relationship, in your speculative opinion?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I mean, we all watched in horror the nature of that relationship, just the psychological, the dynamic between the two was so disturbing, and really indicated that there was something deeper there. Many have speculated, was President Trump somehow compromised, in his early years? Was there do the Russians have a hold on him? Some have even, argued that he based on what they saw in behaviors, he must have been an agent. Look, I think Trump would have been a nightmare for the Russians to handle as an agent, completely uncontrollable, completely undisciplined. But he certainly would have come to their attention in the early years. They certainly would have studied him, understood his psychology extraordinarily well. They would have played him by like a fiddle, and I think Putin, being a case officer, would have done that. And I think they played into, I think what, Trump had a real fondness for authoritarian figures, right? And you see that from his kind of fawning demeanor towards a number of other leaders besides Putin. You think of Erdogan as well. So I think, the combination of those issues, probably created a dynamic that was certainly not good for the U.S. And I think in the long run, not good for Russia either. You could argue that Russia gained almost nothing during the 4 years of Putin's presidency. Relations certainly weren't better at the end of it. They gained no relief from sanctions. They ended up with harder regime of sanctions against them. There's very few issues that unite the policy community and in Washington, across political lines. Russia's one of them, China being the other. Almost universal disdain in Congress and demand for much harder actions, much tougher actions against Russia in the realm of sanctions, in the realm of pushback militarily, pushback on the intelligence side, and economically. And it's going to be really hard, to find, I think, finding a path forward for Biden administration other than opposition is going to be tough.
Not to belabor this point, but with the news that we will have access to Trump's tax returns, Paul, do you imagine that we're going to discover some money trails, through Deutsche Bank, for example, or through some of the condominium purchases that happened in New York and Florida in around 2008? Are we going to find out more information about some of the nuts and bolts of this connection, in your opinion?
Yeah. I think that information will come out, particularly if you start to see Deutsche Bank details start to come out in some of those engagements, and there'll be a trail of breadcrumbs to follow there. Where they lead, I have no idea, but undoubtedly more information will come out.
Yevgeny, let's go back to the decision of Amnesty International. And there's a question here. Is this something that we should put into the US press regarding AI's decision to strip Navalny of his status and thus arouse the American members of Amnesty International to demand a reversal of this decision? Do you think that kind of pressure is something that American citizens can play in terms of illustrating why what Amnesty International did was a really surprise and unfortunate decision?
I think that it's, of course, it helps. Also, one of the sources of Amnesty International is a very well-known Stalinist and supportive Syrian dictator, Katya Kazbek. She lives in New York City. So she enjoys the luxuries of the American democracy, and she's a heir to some millions that she's using here in the United States. I think, of course, it's very important that American press will write about this and will acknowledge this very strange timing. And what's more important is that Amnesty International used fake data. They used, they say that Navalny said this, and this. For instance, they said that, he said something against Jews. I'm an observant Jew, and we're close friends. So, but, anyway, and it's never happened. It just never happened, however it was used. So it's, for me, there is no question asked that Amnesty International was fed with this, with all kind of, propaganda, was fed with untrustful information and disclosure of that mistakes that were made by by the grassroots organizations of Amnesty International and its lead office in United Kingdom, I think it's important, to do not just for Navalny, but because so many people across the globe do trust Amnesty International. So that's why it's so important to straighten the record and to say that, guys, if you are so easily used, then people should think twice before really trusting Amnesty International as such.
So we got just a couple of minutes left, and I think I'll ask the same question of each of you. And Sean, I'll start with you. In terms of the current situation in Russia, what's something that gives you room for optimism, or what are some of the seeds that you see taking growth in Russia that you think are really, really important as sort of your final words today?
I mean, I think, you only have to go and spend a bit of time in Moscow to realize that Moscow and also other cities in Russia are full of lots of smart, interesting, ambitious people, that it feels like a European city. I often wonder if it's sometimes a problem of our reporting, that everybody that a lot of people I speak to their first questions about Moscow will be like, oh my God, like, are you able to like eat normally? Is it just unbelievably depressing? Can you possibly make friends with any Russians? And you think, okay, well, you clearly don't quite have an understanding that in many ways, and part of this in Moscow and in other cities is down to the authorities using the oil money that came in the first part of Putin's rule quite intelligently and creating a nicer quality of life in a lot of places. But you do immediately realize that there are multiple different Russias. There is the Putin and the KGB people around him. There are all kinds of different subcultures, just as in any country. But if you talk to people who are 18, 20, 22, who have the whole life that they remember Putin was the president, I think they have a very different view of where they would like their country to be in 10 or 20 years' time.
Yevgenia, let me ask you the same question. What are, you're about to head back. What are some of the things that you are most optimistic about today?
First of all, don't mistake Russia for the Soviet Union. It's no longer Soviet Union. It doesn't have, Russian rulers, they don't carry any ideology. In fact, their biggest icon is the American dollar. So whenever you think about how to deal with these corrupted leaders of Russia, just don't forget that they make money in Russia by using Russian oil, natural resources. However, they prefer to use this money abroad. One of Putin's closest associates allegedly has 2 houses near Atlanta, Georgia. So, and Putin's daughter just bought a house in one of the wealthiest part of Paris, the most aristocratic part of Paris. So they prefer to use their money abroad. They prefer to put their kids in the American universities and in the British and Swiss boarding schools. So once again, this is done because private, different American universities, they accept money without really thinking about whether this money are toxic or not. And I think that in a way, you should be more careful with that. It's not to say that I argue that you should, kick out Russian kids from American universities, just to say that stop taking, $50 million checks for their study, and maybe these kids should go and try to work in order to make through the American educational system. It is to say that unfortunately Putin is very good in dealing with greedy people, and there are quite a few greedy people in this part of the world as well. I think that the whole situation, this whole story of the solar winds, which happened on the territory, on the ground of the United States, using American servers and American computers, suggests that it's not just our problem. It's from now on, it is your problem as well. So I think just be very careful when you deal with toxic Russian money. And I think it's important for the American public opinion to realize that some of the money which are finding its ways to American scholarships, American fellowships, American think tanks, American universities, some of that money may have strings attached.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Paul, we started with you, and let's end with you, Paul. Tell us a couple of things that give you some optimism when you look at Russia today, and of course Russia tomorrow.
What gives me optimism is that we've seen historically that change is possible in Russia. We saw the Soviet Union collapse and dismantle because of the actions of longstanding actions of folks who opposed the system and stood as icons of bravery and ideals. And we saw a great human capital, and leadership that enabled that. Russia stands at a strategic crossroads, I think. Putin has had a goal of making Russia a great power again. And that's a legitimate goal. But the question is whether Russia is a great power defined in 20th century terms or 21st century terms. And I think right now that's really an open question. If they insist on, and the regime insists on repression as a means of staying in power, if they continue to fear the people and to not be legitimate in terms of choices, then I think that you'll see the choices being made drive them into a cul-de-sac, drive towards the past rather towards the future. But I think I share Evgenia's optimism that that a few people can make a big difference, and I would hold to that.
Well put, and a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Yevgeny Albats, Sean Walker, Paul Colby. What a terrific program. Thank you so much for all your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And for all of you out there, this, of course, will be on our YouTube channel shortly. We would love to see you tomorrow for our program on local journalism and democracy. And of course, next week we'll feature the CEO and editor-in-chief of Bloomberg News and Adrian Wooldridge from The Economist, looking at the pandemic and all the amazing and horrifying changes and opportunities created by it. So thanks so much for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you again next time. Bye-bye.